Okay, we have Azumi Tanaka out of Southern California, whose birthday it was
Happy belated, Izumi.
yesterday, maybe the day before.
It was yesterday.
Happy birthday. Great for you
Thank you.
to join us.
Yeah.
Alyssa snuck in here. She's actually literally downstairs right below me. So here's what we should do. David, will you pull up the slides and we're going to start to move in this direction of getting us going, because if we're recording, then we get to be punctual and we can share this with people that did sign up, even though it did look like a lot of folks were on it, and we got more and more folks coming into it. But just to orient everybody, I think I know everybody outside of Gwen and Jacob. My name is Neil Collins. I'm one of the co-conspirators here at Latitude Regenerative Real Estate. You might have tuned into the Regenerative Real Estate podcast that I get to graciously be the host of, and an offering that we are really excited about is to do these monthly, what started off as ecosystem calls, and now we're dubbing them Regenerative Real Estate workshops. But it's a way in which we really want to help expose what is going on within the greater plurality of the real estate industry. We have an incredible ecosystem directory of value-aligned organizations, companies, and individuals that are really doing interesting work. And it's not just in the energy sector, it's not just in the ecological design side of things that is really showcasing designers, architects, engineers, energy modelers, attorneys, so that we can create a resource base for those companies and organizations that are working across the country and across different parts of the world that our clients can tap into, or even us as what we call Latitude change agents can use to help advance our projects. Will you go to the next screen, David? Our mission is we want to transform how we are inhabiting the planet. We do that through real estate sales and consulting, really seeing that role to work with clients at the very beginning, whenever they're amassing together hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, to really make sure that we are looking at land and habitat through a holistic perspective and bringing in the right resources at the right timing to really help catalyze a regenerative approach. Will you go to the next slide, please? There's a couple of different ways that you can get involved. These monthly calls are a great way to do it. We are certainly receptive and in love whenever we do have clients or client referrals. If anybody is looking for our services, you can join in on our Mighty Networks, which is a great spot if you have questions or you want to be additive to the conversation around what's going on with regenerative real estate. And then if you are representing a business, like many of you here, and you want to go into the ecosystem directory of value-aligned businesses, we would love to have you there. And let's see, go to the next slide. I am going to be passing the baton off to our colleague out of the Hudson Valley, David Todd, who's going to introduce our gracious speakers today. And so I'll let you take it away, David.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. And welcome, everyone. This is, as you see on the screen, the Future of Energy Community Solar Microgrid call. And in a moment, I'll take it off screen share so you'll get to hear from our hosts or our guest speakers today, Ben Parvey and Dana Hall. They'll be sharing a bit, and then we'll be following with a session where we'll be able to do some question and answer. But before we get going, I hand over to them. I just want to give you a little context of who's here with us today. So I'd like to share a little bit about Dana. Dana is the founder of Hudson Energy Law, a boutique energy law firm assisting businesses, nonprofits, and governments in the clean energy sector since 2008. She's also the board secretary and counsel for Mid-Hudson Energy Transition, a not-for-profit community choice aggregation administrator. offering innovative and equitable clean energy programs in New York State. Other roles include General Counsel for Core Development Group. She is Deputy Director of Low Impact Hydropower Institute. She's also taught some courses along the way, environmental and climate law related classes at Purchase College and energy policy classes at Cooper Union in their green building design program. And outside of this robust work life, Dana is also very devoted to the music sector and plays a lot of supporting roles in her husband's jazz work with the Jazz Passengers. And then I want to share a little bit more about Ben as well, so you get a little familiar with Ben Parvey, the CEO of Blue Sky Power. He's spent his professional career building a clean, resilient energy future for cities, schools, industry, and institutions. For 15 years, Ben has overseen an implementation of innovative finance structures and transactional elements of Blue Sky's clean energy projects, in addition to advancing strategic growth for the company. And in 2017, Blue Sky Power achieved the Energy Solutions Center Project of the Year Award for Clean Energy Microgrid. And prior to Blue Sky Power in 2008, Ben was a public finance attorney on over $4 billion of capital project financing for state and local governments and institutions. And of course, in addition to another big, robust work life, he has 5 crazy kids at home. And we'll get to know them here in a moment. So welcome, Dana and Ben. I'm going to take off screen share so you can meet the attendees. And
Great. Okay, so hi, everybody. I'm Dana. Good to meet you all. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you all about these great solutions for regenerative communities. I'm here with my friend Ben Parvey. Thank you for those great introductions, David and Neil, for providing some context. And we're looking forward to presenting here and having a discussion afterwards too. So please, if you have questions, jot them down, and we'll have a robust back and forth. So just to get us started, I put up my favorite Greta Thunberg quote: "The climate crisis has already been solved. We already have the facts and the solutions. All we have to do is wake up and change." And for me, it's just delightful to be talking to a group of people who probably already know that quote, but clearly through your work in this organization and this community, you're furthering that effort. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. Okay, so I will skip over my energy background here because David already told you most about it. I will just say I am based in the Hudson Valley, and I'm admitted in New York and New Jersey, although I have done project deals all around the country. So moving on, I wanted to give folks kind of a background, starting at the bird's eye view about how our energy system works, because I think it provides important context to understand what community solar is. So I'm going to fly through a couple of slides quickly here on some background. So the basic overview here is about how, traditionally generation is at that large central station at the top row of this infographic, big nuclear plants, and increasingly now clean energy technologies like large utility scale solar and wind farms. And those technologies connect at the transmission grid, at the transmission level, where industries and factories might connect for their loads, but otherwise it's too high voltage for the smaller consumers. So it's stepped down to the distribution network. And here's another view of that concept, where these large generators typically are operated with some point of central control, a system operator. Across the country, we have regional system operators. In the West, in New England, there's NEPOOL. New York and Texas each have their one state system, NYISO and ERCOT. The Mid-Atlantic states have a large system. But it demonstrates some of the tension between federal and state, because if energy crosses state lines, it's at the transmission level, it's regulated by the federal government. But otherwise, when it's within a state, it's regulated by individual state governments. And what that does is impacts how policies are set, because they're all different. So again, another view here of large generation on the left connecting to the transmission grid, stepping down in voltage to the distribution grid, being delivered to retail customers. But then on the far right, you see what's called distributed energy resources. And these are also referred to as distributed generation. This infographic shows you some of the technologies that are all considered distributed generation. So what we're talking about today, at least what I'm going to talk about, is community solar on the bottom, about, I guess, what is that, 5 o'clock. And then microgrids is what Ben is going to talk about. And these are two great distributed solutions, energy sources that can connect to the distribution grid. But all these other things are also distributed generation. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with these concepts, but I won't go into too much detail here. I think for the benefit of utilities, these kinds of resources can actually be very beneficial because they can help manage peak energy production. All of these tools are available to help prevent brownouts and create more reliability in the grid. So the utilities do find them valuable, although they also like to sell energy and they prefer other people not to be selling energy. So there's kind of a decades-long fight between the DG owners, independent power producers, and utilities, and how that energy should be valued and compensated for. But community solar, so let's get into that. What is community solar? So there's kind of a generic definition by the Department of Energy here, which is that it's really any solar project that's in one geographic area where the benefits or the energy represented by benefits can flow to multiple customers that do not have to be grid connected. So essentially it's a virtual connection. And what you have here is on the lower right, you have your solar farm. Those panels are installed, they produce energy, it goes into the grid. Customers who sign up to join the community solar will then get a credit every month for the share of electricity that their subscription represents. So that's basically, broadly speaking, a generic definition of community solar. A little bit about how much of this stuff there is. The DOE, regularly produces data sets on what's happening in a variety of policies. So in December of 2021, they reported that there are community solar projects existing in 39 states and Washington, D.C. And at that time, there were 22 states that enacted policies, either state law or regulatory policy, that supported or enabled community solar legal structures. And now it's reported to be 24 by Desire, the database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency. That's a website I recommend everybody go to and visit because it's really an interesting resource to find out what kind of incentives and programs are available for you or your communities in your locations. And at that time, 3,200 megawatts of total solar capacity installed nationally. It's grown since then, but that's just some basic metrics about community solar in the United States. Okay, so how are they operated?
I'm going to get 5 pounds of.
Oh, is somebody should go on mute, or are you talking to me? Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to keep going. So how are community solar projects operated? So utilities can say they have community solar projects. And what they do is in states where they're allowed to own generation, they build projects, they connect them to their grid, and then they go to their utility customers and ask them, would you like to join a community solar project? And they subscribe and they call that community solar. They also, in deregulated states where they're not allowed to own generation and private companies own generation, they enter into contracts with privately owned projects, connect those projects to the grid, and apply credits to their customers. Whether or not that's really community solar, I kind of question that, because to me, community means something different than just having a large utility operator program. So other structures of community solar would be municipal or nonprofit based. where a private entity owns a project and contracts with a municipality or with a nonprofit organization like a church. And those groups go to their constituencies and get people to sign up for community solar. So a church or a local group can do this. They can, make a deal with a solar project that's being built and fill it up with subscriptions just from their community. Some organizations I'm seeing are doing fun things like competitions to see who can sign up more subscribers faster. And so that's a pretty neat way to get people to sign up. And then a little bit more on private and cooperative models where state law allows it. A group of individuals can form their own entity to own a solar project. This is the one that I think is probably most suitable for regenerative communities where you guys are really looking to find energy sources that directly feed your community. If you have the space, you form an special purpose entity that is just on paper designed to own the project. That company will hire a solar company and pay them to build the project, and then also have an ongoing maintenance maintenance contract to make sure that it's operated properly over the years and producing what it's supposed to produce. And then you finance the project through third parties and also state incentives. State and federal. I'm going to take you through a little bit about financing and incentives for community solar projects. There's really three legs, basically, that all private solar projects are financed with: some form of tax breaks, tax credits, both at the state and federal level, as well as state and local governments may have sales or property tax exemptions, which can economically benefit a project. Some states may have rebates, either through utilities or through state programs, where they pay developers cash upfront to build projects. And then performance payments, which are a value stream of revenue, which is associated with the production of the project, usually on a kilowatt hour, megawatt hour basis. And those are, they can come through either state or one of the federal tax programs is performance-based. That's the production tax credit. So last year, or is it, well, anyway, whenever the Inflation Reduction Act passed, it might have been late 2021, there have been, great news for the solar energy industry. The solar industry was used to good tax credits, 30% of the cost of a project could be reimbursed through tax credits. But we were always like waiting for December 31st when it was going to expire. And there was this constant cycle of rushing to get projects to be built so that we could get what we needed to get filed in time to get that tax credit. When the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, it is now solid for 10 years. And it has much even more lucrative and beneficial credits. So I'll take you through this really quickly. The base rate, it really is 6%. Everybody says 30%, but it's 6%, or if you're under a megawatt, it is 30% if you don't have prevailing wage. In order to get to fully 30%, if your project is over a megawatt, you have to build it with prevailing wage labor and the apprenticeship program, which the rules for that are displayed by or governed by the Department of Labor. On top of that 30%, if you've got your prevailing wage labor, you can also get another 10% tax credit if you use materials that are made in the United States. And you can get another 10% on top of that if you build your project on what's called an energy community, which might be a brownfield site where there used to be coal or oil operations and it's kind of dirty and it's been repurposed. That's an energy community bonus. And then lastly, on top of those, you can also get a low-income community bonus where you can get 10% if the project is located in a low-income community or on Indian land, or a 20% bonus if it also provides at least half of its output financial benefit to low-income customers. So when you add all that up, if you meet all of those criteria, developers can get 70% of their project costs reimbursed by tax credits, which is very lucrative. It's not easy to get all those, but that's why you're going to see a lot of growth in solar in the coming years. So a few minutes here and I'll be done. I'll turn it over to Ben, but I want to quickly talk about geography and states. I mentioned earlier that because states regulate electricity at the distribution level, each individually, there are different rules. So what this map shows you is which states have community solar policies in place where they went out of their way to pass a law or adopt a regulation that allows for community solar structures to be built and owned privately. What they all have in common is this concept of virtual metering, where the subscribers who get the benefit from the project are not directly wired to that project. It can happen through the grid. So this is another map from DOE, which shows you a little bit more of the diversity in geography of which states, some states have sort of a boom. Colorado was the first to really lead the community solar market. Massachusetts and Minnesota in the mid 20-teens had a lot of growth. Florida and New York are pretty hot right now. I'm hearing a lot about Maryland and Illinois as states that have new policies that are emerging now, and a lot of companies are shifting operations there because they think the programs will be beneficial. So suffice it to say that for a solar energy company like Ben's Blue Sky Power, it takes a lot to monitor all these different policies in these different states and understand the layers of incentives and programs and structures. And so it's pretty complex. I'll briefly touch on some of the states. David talked to us about some of the states where he knows that members of this community are based and working on regenerative communities. So I wanted to quickly touch on Georgia and the 3 states actually that are on the screen. Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas generally have those utility-based community solar programs where they call it community solar, but it's really still utility operated. One interesting note about Georgia, Vice President Harris was there a few months ago at a big press conference announcing there's a company called Q Cells, which announced they're building some new manufacturing facilities in Georgia to make solar panels. For a long time, this industry has relied on manufacturing from China and continues to do that. But part of the Inflation Reduction Act, as displayed by the adder I showed you about domestic content, is trying to incentivize new manufacturing capacity in the United States. So Q Cells announced a big new factory in Georgia. And they also announced a new deal where they're going to deploy 1.2 gigawatts of community solar projects. But guess what? They're not in Georgia. They're going to be in Illinois, Maine, and Maryland, because those are states that have policies that allow them to set up those structures. So again, just to emphasize the difference in the regulatory arena and the legal structure that these programs can exist in really makes a difference. You guys will all get copies of these slides, I'm assuming. For anybody in Texas, I found a really cool study from the University of Austin, which is a roadmap on community-based organizations leading from the ground up on community solar. And so folks who are in Austin or elsewhere in Texas, you might want to look into that study, and there's a link there. So I've got 2 slides left I know we've got folks from California. I can't even begin to start to describe California's solar policy. It's extremely aggressive and strong and a great market. They've really led the way on what's called community choice aggregation, which is a municipal-based structure where municipal governments can automatically enroll people who live and work the accounts in their jurisdiction into renewable energy supply. But they've been less strong on community solar. So only recently did California pass a new law, which is launching some new community solar programs. They call it community renewable energy. And you'll probably start to see a lot more community solar projects in California. One interesting note about California is that they do require that at least 51% of their subscribers be low income to participate. So they really are trying to, through policy, make sure that disadvantaged communities are not left behind in the energy transition. And then the best for last, I like to say, because I'm a New Yorker, community solar in New York is called Community Distributed Generation. The title is awful, but the reason for it is because it's technology agnostic, and that hydropower and other renewable fuels and eligible technologies can also set up these structures. I spent a number of years working in the hydro industry, and I love that technology, and worked for a group that focused on minimizing the environmental impacts of hydropower. So I like to see them succeeding in these markets as well. So New York is great at that. New York caps community solar projects at 5 megawatts. And again, just like the other structures, it allocates bill credits to customers as long as they're in the same territory. They don't have to be directly wired. They use an awfully complicated compensation mechanism called the value stack. And if you want to dig into that, we can set up a separate call. For most utility, I think all the community solar subscriptions in New York have a standard 10% savings, which is basically when you subscribe, you pay 90 cents on the dollar for your bill credits. It's kind of like those supermarket gift card fundraisers that you might have for a church or a nonprofit, where you buy $100 gift card, but you only pay $90 for it. Sorry about that. My dogs really hate that idea. And then New York also has an incentive program called New York Sun, and part of that goes specifically towards community solar. There's additional rebates or cash incentives provided to developers for building community solar projects, as well as for low-income community solar projects. And their goal is to get 40% of the benefits to low-income or disadvantaged communities. So that is my presentation. I'm not sure how I did on time, but I'm going to stop sharing. And I guess we'll turn it over to Ben.
All right. Nice job, Dana. Thank you. It's very complicated, community solar. It's not easy, and every state is a little bit different. So luckily you were the one who talked about some of the state regulations, so I'm not going to talk about that today, because it differs state by state, which makes it a challenge. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get going and introduce you guys to what we do. So we get over to PowerPoint. All right, can everyone see my screen? All right, good. All right, so I'm CEO of Blue Sky Power, as well as new subsidiary we formed called OwnGrid. We'll get into it in just a minute. So our purpose is to improve the quality of life for our customers and their communities. Today, we're going to talk about microgrids, as well as off-grid systems, primarily in the residential sector and for communities. And we're going to give a case study discussing an agri-hood in Massachusetts. All right, so what we do. So Blue Sky Power has been in business for 15 years, using our holistic approach for sustainable development, focusing on transparency, sustainability, and resiliency. As the energy company of the future, we look to reduce cost, increase operational efficiency, and decrease carbon footprint for the benefit of our customers, their employees, clients, tenants, and stakeholders, as well as the environment we share. So really what all that means is that we develop clean energy projects, meaning solar, microgrids, combined heat and power or cogeneration facilities, as well as battery storage and fuel cells. On the commercial side, we do that predominantly for senior living, collegiate housing, school districts, municipalities, and generally commercial industrial facilities, but in that manufacturing, but a whole lot of multifamily, senior living, collegiate housing, as well as manufacturing facilities. And in that development, I mean, everything from the initial concept to all the way through to implementation. So, we don't currently do the construction, although we're about to start purchasing some local installation companies for our residential installs. But we do the design, project development, interconnection with utilities, as well as financing, own and operating the systems. So first we're going to talk about microgrids. Dana did a nice job of having a Department of Energy definition as opposed to I just made up a definition. A microgrid is an energy generation system that's connected to multiple loads and facilities that are connected to one or more power sources that operate either in conjunction with the grid or independently of the grid. And if we're operating independently of the grid, we call that islanded. So we might have a solar and battery storage and generator system that's a microgrid that powers, a call it college campus, or even can be, a neighborhood as well as, a commercial facility next to it, and providing most of the power as well as importing some grid power. And then when the grid goes out or there's a power outage, then the microgrid controller allows that to operate the system. So on those systems, the microgrid controller really is like a central brain that is bringing in all the data about the usage coming in from the facility, the output from the different sources of energy, and decides what the best use is at that given time, whether you should be providing power from solar, battery storage, the grid, or generators, and keeps the facility powered up, but also monitors and optimizes for the best conditions. So in that, we also try to make this as easy as possible for customers. So we also fund and operate the systems. So we really look to be a utility alternative, although we might keep a utility connection. Usually we're providing most of the power for a facility. So that's generally what a microgrid is. And then when we go into Q&A, we can discuss it some more. But different examples of microgrids that we've done, include like a cogeneration plant, which is like a big engine essentially connected with solar and battery storage for a mixed use collegiate housing, restaurants, commercial and residential. And that operates. Other examples include, powering a whole few blocks of an area that are integrated with solar and battery storage, as well as generators or fuel cells for that area. So we'll go into it a little bit more in the off-grid example, but when we fund and operate the systems, essentially we make it in replacing the utility that people just pay their monthly payment to a provider like us, as opposed to paying it to the utility. So we're charging them for the power from the system, but it's a lot more manageable because it's on a fixed monthly payment, as opposed to electric price volatility we all see. Just last year, energy was the highest rising commodity in the S&P global index on commodities. So, a lot of people are being hit hard by the increase in energy prices, and we already see all the other price increases due to inflation. So that's microgrids. Now we're going to talk about off-grid for residential, which is a new company, a subsidiary of Blue Sky that we started a year ago, called OhmGrid. And the purposes of OhmGrid is to provide off-grid or grid optional energy to homeowners. And we essentially replace the utility entirely with solar, battery storage, and fuel cell or generator. With that, since we're providing all of the power and we're not necessarily connected to the grid, we're able to provide guaranteed and resilient power. So we size the systems to be able to account for the entire load of a facility or a home, and we provide a fixed monthly payment with no price volatility. In owning and operating that equipment, just like when the utility owns and operates the distribution wires in your meter, we fully maintain and operate the equipment and provide 24/7 service on any of the equipment. So that's off-grid. And in looking at utility service, the utilities are one of the lowest J.D. Power ranked industries due to price volatility, poor customer service, and poor record for response and resiliency. So we looked at that model and said, what are consumers looking for that allow us to be a complete utility alternative? So with that, we created OhmGrid, which is an alternative to having your utility service. Give me 1 second to get to the next slide, because I want to go over some of the features and benefits of having OhmGrid operate. And we went back and having studied in depth customers' reviews. If you look at your utility service, I mean, it's one of the essentials that you absolutely have to have is power in your home. And when we saw how the power was delivered and operated, you know, having done these projects for 15 years, we noticed that it's not just providing renewables, but it's actually examining the entire business model, which we think, you know, correlates really well with regenerative real estate, because you're sort of re-examining our whole mission of being driven to create a sustainable life for, you know, our customers as well as ourselves and their communities. So we looked at the entire utility model and said, how can we make it better? So we make it better with simple billing. You know, each home on average uses about 13 pounds of carbon dioxide and carbon emissions a year. And we looked at making electricity wireless, so you don't have to be connected to the grid. We saw that customer service is something that's absolutely essential to our customers, for all utility customers. So we offer 24/7 support, as well as lifetime maintenance and a 1-minute guarantee. So if a customer loses power for even a minute, they get that whole day for free. So that's what we're doing to revolutionize energy in the home by providing our own grid systems. I want to give a case study now of a really neat community. It's an agrihood, which is an agricultural neighborhood. It's a community in Framingham, Massachusetts called Bating Brook Farm. And I actually, I think maybe, David, I think you had a link to that. Maybe you can paste that in the chat. And once you guys look at it, so they've received all permits and entitlements, and construction is going to be starting in September on the community. And it combines sort of active farming with residential community. So there's 63 residences, and they not only provide that there is shared barn space and shared agricultural space for livestock, including cows, horses, and chickens. There's also shared agricultural space, which you can see over here, like in the bottom left of this diagram for the property. And then there's also, you know, very large barn facility, and then other spaces that are reserved for communal agriculture. And so the model is really neat because it also not only includes shared spaces for agriculture, including cultivation and livestock, but it also includes combined maintenance. So if a homeowner leaves to go out of town, their home is, you know, maintained. People can take care of it, you know, water plants, as well as take care of things inside the home if requested. So it's like concierge maintenance services included in the agrihood. Very neat concept that Coda Homes, the developer, is incorporating into that. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's surrounded by 800-acre, the Callahan State Park, as you can see up in the top right, with more than 800 acres of parkland for hiking, horseback riding, and walking. It's just an absolutely gorgeous area. So we're very excited to be providing the energy for the homes, which will be OhmGrid systems consisting of solar, battery storage, and generators with guaranteed power, resilient and clean energy. And all operation and maintenance is included with those with the fixed monthly payments. So residents won't have to worry about grid outages at all. So we're very excited to be working with Bating Brook Farm and implementing this in their agrihood. That concludes the presentation. It's a really exciting time for us here, and really can't tell Neil and David how much I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this with you, as well as looking forward to getting involved with Latitude, each of you on the call, and the regenerative real estate community generally. So thank you very much for the time, and I guess Dana and I can answer some of your questions now.
So Ben, I do see a question that Jessica posted in the chat, asking if you can expand about the grid optional, and if utilities need to give communities authorization to build an off-grid, their own little mini grid.
Yeah. All right. So there, let me see. Where's the question? Past. Okay, Jessica. Okay. Utility proves them to be. Okay, so it's a little bit of a loaded question because it depends on which state you're operating in, Jessica. So I'll answer it sort of with a few different bullet points related to that. So in most states, you don't need permission from the utility operator to be off grid. If you're doing a grid optional, and let me just make a couple of different little variations to that. If we're providing individual homes in the community with solar and battery storage, or just called an off-grid system, you don't need permission. It's an individual property right. You don't need permission from anyone other than typical, municipal construction permits and any other, entitlements or, environmental permitting you need for construction. If you're going to do a microgrid or, a centralized system, and I'll explain that, by way of diagram, I'll share again on that PowerPoint and just going back one. If we were to put, so the systems I'm discussing now is totally off grid, are on each of the individual homes. If you were to put a centralized system right here as a microgrid project, and I'll go back a couple slides as an example. This system right here is like 1 megawatts of carports at a residential housing on a college campus. If you were to do that in that same area, then you would end up having to get permission from the utility, as well as standard permits that you would need, as well as permission from the state. If you want to do that off grid, you would not be able to do that because you would end up being a regulated utility. If you do that as grid optional on a centralized system, like right here, let's say we put solar arrays here and then tie into a central distribution system, even if we own the distribution system or the neighborhood owns it, then we would be considered a regulated utility, which is why we developed the own grid model to be on each, powering each individual home. So in this community, rather than doing a microgrid, which we would rather do, we're not permitted to do so due to state regulation. So each individual system is on there off grid. If it's grid optional, even on each individual home or on a centralized system, then you do have to get interconnection approval from the utility, as well as your standard regulatory permits from the State Board of Public Utilities. Did that answer? It's probably a little bit longer of an explanation, but it is very nuanced and depends, on each state, as well as sort of those individual factors on how the system is sized and implemented.
I see in the chat, Ben, that she said that is helpful. Thanks.
Okay.
And
You're
I'll
welcome.
just take this opportunity to just invite people to use the raise hand button just to kind of queue up some questions and comments and feedback. I see Daniel, and I'll just follow that as a way to kind of bring people into the conversation.
And real quick, though, I just wanted to answer the question Mark had that Heather had. We are in North Carolina and Tennessee. We don't have any operating systems in North Carolina and Tennessee, but we have proposed a number of systems in Tennessee, and being a Memphis boy, I'm happy to do a project there.
Thanks, Ben.
Yep.
Shall I go?
Oh, yeah, there you are. Yes, Daniel.
Thank you, Ben and Dana. Dana, I appreciate the nuances around community solar, and Ben, your product looks clean, and I appreciate the off-grid and what looks like a simple, clean package that feels accessible. My question perhaps is leaning a bit more towards Dana, since she's here in the Hudson Valley, as am I. I'm in Hudson, New York. My question, and this might be an unanswerable question, so please wonder with me a little bit. There's this pattern of, I would say, an explosion of solar panels happening in our region, up and down the valley, that is going over a lot of farmland, I'd say. And I'm wondering if there's like comprehensive regional plans on where said solar panels can go, if that's a discussion that is happening. Why are they happening on farmland? Can they happen on parking lots? Is that an active discussion
Sure.
in the field?
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic. Just in terms of how, is there a regional plan specific to solar? No. However, I think it's Scenic Hudson has a solar capacity map project where they are identifying what they deem as appropriate locations to site solar, so as to not, to prioritize the impact of a project on other priorities and make sure that they're located in the right place. I think developing on parking lots and rooftops is always preferable to green land projects. However, often you're at the mercy of the utility and where there's interconnection capacity. That's a big factor that people don't necessarily understand. The grid, has, based on how the grid is laid out, it only can allow so much generation in one specific place, and the voltage of the wires has to be big enough to allow projects to go online. So sometimes there are upgrades required, cost millions of dollars, and then nobody wants to build that project. So it's a confluence of things of where can you interconnect, where is there space. Land is cheaper to lease. Parking lots require carports, which is much more expensive to build because of steel. So there's a lot of complications. I will say, however, that New York has such an aggressive distributed generation solar goal that you're going to continue to see more farmland projects proposed. And I generally tend to support them, although I'm a big fan of agrivoltaics, which is a compatible use approach where you can still farm the land actively while there's a solar project coexisting. And you can plant pollinators, you can have goats mow the lawn, and you can even plant you can even plant, certain delicate crops actually work better under the shading of the solar array. So there's some interesting new approaches that can be used to address that. And I'll leave it at that because my dogs are, apologize.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just since we have a national audience, I'll add a little bit to that. And that is that each state's a little bit different. So like New Jersey has gone kind of back and forth on that, in that initially, well, actually that's still in place. So solar was considered an agricultural use. So you're allowed to do solar and it didn't impact your agricultural tax exemption or being assessed at the agricultural rate, meaning you could still count that farmland with the area that's used for solar. But that's only for solar for your property. As where those solar farms you're talking about in New York, that's being used for community solar. New Jersey has a prohibition on using agricultural land for providing solar for anything other than just for the farm. So each state's a little bit different in how they're doing it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Next, we have Izumi out of Southern California.
Thank you, David. Ben already responded to my question, but maybe you can explain just a little bit. because we were just about to sign a contract to get a PPA agreement, and our understanding was that the payment was constant for the contract period. So I don't know what the difference.
Yeah.
You know, it's not much different, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah, so just a little bit different. It sounds like under a power purchase agreement, typically you're buying the power at a certain kilowatt hour rate. So, they may be charging you, I don't know what your rate is, 12, 15 cents a kilowatt hour.
Mhm.
And then you pay for the amount of the solar output that's coming out. So let's say in June, you're having, you're paying, $400 a month. But in October, when there's a lot, or call it even January, when there's less solar output, you may be paying like $250 a month because you didn't have as much output from the solar system. So the difference is we're not just doing solar, but we do solar, battery storage, and either a power generator, like a backup generator, or a hydrogen fuel cell or a standard fuel cell. So with those three connected together, then we provide guaranteed power. And at that, we're not selling power at the per kilowatt hour rate. We have a fixed payment because no matter what time it is during the year, we're providing all the power that the home needs. So that's the difference.
Well, so the contract that we were about to sign was telling us that it will be a consistent payment. It will be a same payment for 25 years, and that including the battery storage system. But we will be still connected to the grid.
Right.
So if we I think if we generate more than the battery can store, it goes back to the grid, and then if we use up the power we generate and use up the power that we stored, then we pull from the grid. So is that the only difference then?
It's very, so when we do a grid optional system, that is the configuration.
I see.
However, we also add on top of that when we're doing, so we have essentially three grades, ohm grid, mid, we call it, and ohm grid light. So in the first instance, you're talking about, essentially ohm grid light, where we have solar and battery storage, and it's interconnected and net metered, right? And it's the exact circumstance you just described, Azumi. And then in the mid, we'll have it similarly sized, but we'll also add a generator or fuel cell.
Oh, I see.
So that we have guaranteed power. So if there's a grid outage, if there's an outage, like let's say, not the rolling power safety shutoffs in California, but let's say there's a 2-day outage and it's, rainy during those couple of days, then your battery will probably be depleted in about 5, hours, maybe 9 at the most. And, you might get some additional charge from solar the next day when the sun comes back up, but you may be without power after the battery is completely discharged.
I see.
When we layer on top of that a generator or fuel cell, then we guarantee power with no outages. So that's the difference, is we want to be able to provide guaranteed power.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And next we have Neil Collins from Whidbey Island, Washington.
Yeah, I'm gonna get some free consulting here from both of you while we have you. Stephen, who's also on the call, we're working on an agri-hood project. It's an assemblage of properties with development working in different phases. So 20 units of workforce housing, 74 units of residential with a farm. And the purpose is really to help integrate systems so there's no wastewater. It goes to the farm on these swales. And so we're at this point in the project where we have architects going, civil engineers, land use attorneys how would you approach a development project of that size to determine, do we go microgrid? Do we go community solar? How does that work with a phase development approach? Like, what's that decision-making matrix that you both, if you had to put your developer hat on, would implement?
Yeah, so we work really closely with developers, like on the AgriHood project that we're doing there. And, essentially we provide all the options for what we can do for distributed generation or, shared system. It really depends, which is the case in most of the answers here. It really depends on state regulations, what you can do with regard to, community solar is a financial transaction. I mean, that doesn't really impact anything other than, finding a solar farm that you can be a subscriber to. And there's certain websites you can go to subscribe. So that's sort of the community solar is you subscribe and, you get billed. And I think I saw on Dana's diagram that Washington State is one of the states with community solar. So that's an option. If you're looking for providing power on site and excuse me. And, it sounds like, is it going to be multifamily or single family?
It'll be both.
Okay. So in that, you can probably put a system in the multifamily, provided there's not a prohibition on providing power, on one system that's net metered or with 1 meter. Do you want to be off grid or on grid? Do you know if you have a answer to that?
I think the optimal situation would be off grid, but it all like any good developer, it all shakes out with the numbers, right?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, if you want to be off grid and there's no prohibition on providing power to multiple units, then you would do one system would be the preferred route to go. And so as far as like how we would look at it, I think it's just a matter of doing like you do in any development as a real estate developer or an energy project developer is, while you're doing your engineering, it sounds like, you're doing, productive reuse of water and, proper reclamation of different types of assets for the property. We would lay out what the different energy system options are, looking at off grid and on grid and running the economics. So, I mean, it's very similar to your process as a real estate developer. So essentially, you'd want to put something on the multifamily or do ground mounted systems, maybe even an example like Dana said of agrivoltaics where, it's raised up above that allows for grazing as well as, production of crops. And then on the single family homes, we'd recommend doing individual systems on each of the homes to provide resiliency to avoid any outages. So, yeah, I mean, if you want, we could screen that or have our engineers look at it and give you some initial thoughts.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
Hey, well, thanks, Ben. And I put in the chat, but we're in bonus time, which is 30 minutes where we'll stay on as questions still surface. And I did have my hand raised with a couple of questions, so I'll take advantage of that. And the first that I have is wondering about precedents around utility easements where power lines cut through neighborhoods and farms, and if there are precedents for capturing that land and and putting putting solar farms under the lines in a way that is still productive and I suppose ties to that same distribution system. Because I imagine an off-grid system under utility easement would be tough negotiating.
Yeah, I think anything on a utility easement is probably tough negotiating. Yeah, I mean, the issue with putting photovoltaics under lines or around lines is the shading is going to reduce the output. And so typically we look for like no obstructions at all. And clear unfettered access to the sun. So I think that would be a little tough. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it. My gut is it's probably a little tough. So, yeah, I don't know, Dana, if you have any additional thoughts or have seen that. It's a good
No.
idea because of the permitting to go.
I've been asked that question. Yeah, it's not common. Utilities are not going to just agree to something like that to be nice. They only do things if the regulatory officials tell them they have to. So that's probably not an option. Some muni utilities, smaller co-op utilities might be more flexible, but to Ben's point, anything that causes even a tiny fraction of shade is going to disrupt the production of the system. So you wouldn't want to put it directly under the wires. And the utilities, there's safety concerns. They don't want cars near there. They don't want anything near there. So probably not.
Yeah, it's a great question that I've never had. But it's a great question because that land, is already reserved for use of, under the easement for use of utilities, and this is utility. Interesting.
Yeah, thanks for,
Yeah, good.
entertaining the question. And if anyone else has any questions, I have another one, but if there are any hands that want to raise, feel free to come off mute or raise your hand. All right, well, I'll take the opportunity. And my other was around storage, Ben. You mentioned generators, fuel cells, batteries. Where do you see that going in terms of the most ecological, reliable, and sustainable way to be storing power that we would be generating if you're going off grid?
Yeah, so I mean, the best way, which I have very limited knowledge of this, but the best way is probably hydro pump storage. If you're looking at the most ecological, as long as you're not disrupting, certain water supplies or, habitats. Dana knows a lot about hydro and has actually kind of introduced me through some other folks to some hydro pump storage. The concept there is that you use the solar essentially to pump water up during the day, and then you let it flow down and spin turbines to generate power at night. So as far as emissions go and use of renewable resources, that's probably the best, although incredibly difficult because you have to have just the right circumstances and you have to have a height differential, meaning we're not doing that in Texas. So that's a challenge. We're not doing that for individual properties. It's for larger projects. And there's no perfect answer, David. I mean, we have these conversations all the time as far as, least emissions, least greenhouse gas emissions is, and talking about being totally resilient, meaning to replace the utility entirely, which is our goal. Our goal is to be the utility of the future. And that means, reduce emissions as much as possible, as well as having complete resilient power that people can rely on, and with exceptional customer service, which utilities don't have. And so we view that for right now, for current technology, as solar, battery storage, and fuel cells. Now, the most cost-effective way to utilize fuel cells right now is using natural gas. However, you don't burn the natural gas in a fuel cell. It's an electrochemical reaction. So I know a lot of people start getting upset when we say, that we're going to use natural gas or propane for the fuel cell. But the fact of the matter is, you're not burning it like in an internal combustion engine in a generator. And it's that is a great way to have that transition of having low to no carbon. So in a fuel cell, it's an electrochemical reaction that splits the carbon and the hydrogen. And so it's not burning it. It's, it's splitting the electrons and using those on a plate. And then, through that, ionic exchange transfer, that then creates the electrons for the power. So, as far as the sort of, most cost-effective with readily available technology, solar, battery storage, and fuel cell. In the output, then if we're talking the next phase of that is, a hydrogen fuel cell with or without solar and battery, where you have hydrogen as the input, and then there's no emissions other than water vapor. And so you can do that through electrolysis, which is separating the hydrogen from, the oxygen and water. And that's expensive. However, in the next few years, we're going to see really, really rapid increase in electrolysis technology as well as in hydrogen fuel cells. But that's just not there right now in a cost-effective, mass commercialization format. But a lot of folks have really good products that are, close to commercialization.
I want to just jump in here and just add that you raised some points, Ben, that made me think about the dynamic between the desire to be, purely zero emission, carbon neutral, and the cost of efficacy of doing so. And what I've experienced in this sector, particularly in buildings, is that you can get 95% of the way to zero, and it's affordable, but you might need that gas powered fuel cell or a backup generator that you run 4 days a year. And sometimes in my project work, I've run across folks who are real purists who just say, no, we can't have any gas anywhere. And it's challenging. It's great for the people who want that. But a lot of people are so thrown off, when to get that extra 5% to go from 95 to 100% might triple your cost. So there is a little bit of practicality that comes into play when you make these choices, and getting to 95% is freaking amazing. I mean, it's really good. So that's just something that I've experienced.
It's tough, and I'd love to hear some input from, professionals. A lot of times, like Dana said, you're getting input from a client, your prospective customer or client. I'd love to hear you folks who, are, the agents and developers and, the change agents out there moving the projects. And I mean, it's like, I'd love to wave my magic wand and say, okay, 24/7, all renewable power with no impacts. But in most cases, that's close to impossible. But like Dana said, getting pretty darn close. I mean, there is sort of a space where the alternative is the utilities, which has, a mix of coal, oil, gas, nuclear, and renewables, or, solar, battery storage, and, like we're talking about, a marginal or nominal use of gas. So, we're looking at a property, for doing off-grid in California for solar battery storage, and they don't want any fuel, they don't want any fossil fuels. And yeah, it's going to be really, really expensive to have them powered totally off-grid, and they don't have a grid connection. So they're going to have to be off-grid. So we have to arrive at a solution. So I don't know, I'd love to open it up and hear what people say, given this is what we wrestle with all the time, is getting people to be able to achieve their dream and deal with the realities of current available technology.
Ben, I had a follow-up question. Have you ever seen where you use solar and batteries and wind as a combination?
Yeah, actually, we're doing that for an off-grid ranch in California, in Escondido. And we will be using generators as well in that, but we are using solar, battery storage, and wind. I think they're like 3 to 6. We have 2 3 to 6 kilowatt wind turbines, and it's way up high, a little ways from San Diego, but way up high on a mountain. And so yeah, the microgrid controller will levelize the different inputs from solar, battery storage, and the wind, because the wind keeps generating at night, which is nice.
Right. Yeah, this where Neil was speaking about, this agri-hood that we're dealing with, is the coastal situation where we've got a very consistent wind, and that, yes, we could run during the winter and during the at night, of course, that we get a lot of wind activity that could compensate and add to the solar.
Yeah, I mean, we'd love to be able to look at that and have, our engineers weigh in if you need any support on that.
Okay.
And it's worth it right there. Thanks for Kit. Let's see, do we have contact details that we can share around, David, in the chat?
Yeah, I'm gonna add some links to the chat for people who'd like to follow up.
Okay.
One moment.
Are there any other questions or comments or feedback or something you want to riff on? We're well into bonus time. Thanks for dropping those links in the chat. There's a handful of folks on here still, but now's the time to have access to these great professionals.
Yeah, I guess sort of reverting back to my last question about sort of getting folks' thoughts on, having clients or homes that, are passive house or, close to net zero, but still needing power. Typically it's a lot easier to do that without needing, additional resources, but I'd love to get the input some from the groups on thoughts of, what you're seeing on folks, the desire for off-grid or for microgrids, and what you're seeing. We primarily deal with it on the energy side. I'd love to hear from the real estate side, sort of what you see as the trends in, potential for off-grid or predominantly produced power on site, other than just, which is fine too, but other than just solar and grid connected net metered solar.
I'll speak from my client base that I tend to find folks who are thinking about these things and having to deal with existing and often historic housing stock, and knowing that they have a bit of a road to pave before it really makes sense for them to make investments like this. So they're typically looking at weatherization projects to tighten up the envelope and reduce demand a bit before they invest in these systems. So that's a pretty typical trend, when, like you said, when they're not in that camp of building passive homes or net zero ready homes. Yeah, which I really appreciate. There are a lot of people looking to preserve existing housing stock and bring it into the 21st century in a way that, in a smart way. I think not going, yeah, from my opinion, that's what I'm seeing here in the mid-Hudson Valley, and what I saw in Portland, Oregon for a number of years, the same kind of trend.
Yeah, I mean, there's old housing stock. I mean, they're, colonial, pre-colonial, and, homes, from mid 1700s all the way through to, today, some of the least efficient homes are the ones from, the 50s, 60s, that are in need of some improvements that haven't really been done in a long time, but yeah.
Yeah, I'd say on Western Washington, it's raining a fair amount of the year, gray and rainy. There's a deep desire for going off grid. A lot of the renewable providers still recommend being grid tied. There's, I think, just a lot of questions around that. There's not a lot of people that I find are talking about microgrids at that retail level. So education is certainly needed there. Questions around financing and cost certainly needed. And then it seems like there's more and more talks around community solar, or what ways that can make sense within kind of the nonprofit community development organizations that are coming up. Or I can't help but look at self-storage facilities with all these like metal roofs just sitting there vacant. and so I don't know if that's held by clients and the retail customers, but certainly I have a lot of questions around how to work with the Inflation Reduction Act and all these funds, or work to even bring, you know, tiny homes on our property to go off grid. Like this is a real kind of challenging pathway to be able to navigate without inside knowledge.
Well, I'd be happy to have a follow-up call with anybody who's interested to talk about some specific questions like that. Because yeah, there's some ways to get that stuff done. So I'd be happy to participate if you want to follow up with me.
Thanks, Dana.
Somebody has their hand raised.
I see G. Edmond.
Yes, that would be me. Sorry. So I just have a quick question because recently I saw a video of Aeromine, I think it's Aeromine rooftop wind, which is supposedly produces 50% more power than solar. It's a special design that's put on rooftops and it funnels the wind in. And I just want to know how the solar, like the solar you guys are talking about, compares to the supposedly new design to the wind. Not sure if I was very clear. Sorry.
I mean, I don't know too much about small wind and new technologies in small wind. I know, you know, when I was looking at it about 10 years ago, it's so resource specific. It depends on whether or not there's wind resource. And in areas where there are buildings, sometimes there's not as much wind. I don't know, but it could be that there's a new technology that's changed that and less resources needed. So I don't know. Ben, do you have any knowledge on that?
I mean, similarly, you know, in that, you know, we've been doing this for 15 years and, you know, people brought us a lot of wind projects early on. And, you know, we found is typically to get a wind project done and financed, you need, you know, like a year worth of wind study and wind data on, you know, times and velocity. And most people typically aren't willing to pay for the wind study. I have seen some of the different technologies, including, you know, the vertical axis where they go up and they're sort of twisted sideways, as opposed to large turbines. And, you know, I have also seen some of the building integrated wind, you know, that's been installed for a few years. Most of them that I've seen, and again, new technology may be better, but of those couple different technologies that were building integrated, they were removed after sort of not producing the way they were anticipated to over the last few years. I sort of think of two different instances of that. One was on the Delaware River Port building, and the other was on the Eagles Stadium, that they had them all around on the vertical ones. Again, both of those are inland. I mean, you almost always need, if you're inland, you know, if you're not right on the coast, then you're not going to have great wind resources unless you're in the plains of Texas, you know, or Oklahoma or Nebraska. So, I mean, that's where we see tons of utility scale wind. Again, though, not the expert by any means, and have, you know, just being in this industry, it's kind of like if someone asked you, you know, the performances of a certain sector of real estate that you don't really cover. Like I've seen it, and we just haven't really done it because it hasn't penciled or worked out where we've looked at it.
I just
Okay,
had one thing on that, and this may be one of those projects that Ben mentioned that they tried and have since taken down, but they were trying the vertical axis side corner mounted helix on some buildings at PSU at Portland State University about 10, 15 years ago, and running studies and seeing what the kind of generation they could get in an urban context, where it was they're purporting that they could use minimal wind to generate, that it would be in turbulent low wind volume would still be able to generate. But I don't know the success of that, but there might be a white paper at PSU.
Okay, thank you for that. I was just curious.
Yeah, I feel like I heard about something recently someone was describing that sort of like operates on, a combination of, magnet and something else that, like, with a little bit of wind speed, it continues to generate more. And that makes sense to me. Again, just sorry, I don't have the experience to speak more on that.
I know in hydro, there's been some really innovative new technologies in the small and micro hydro space, the Archimedes screw and some other technologies which don't look like a typical hydro conventional generator, that are, well, actually hydro is very efficient in terms of its generation, but even more so, and very fish friendly and applicable. So
Archimedes screw, that just sounds like a product that's ready to fly off the shelves.
yeah, you should
Yeah.
Google it. It's actually an ancient technology
Oh,
from
wow.
Greece,
Oh,
but it's been
fascinating.
rediscovered and reapplied. It's like
Hmm.
it's a conical shape that has a sphere, like a screw thing in the middle. I'm
Ah.
very bad at describing. I'm a lawyer. I don't do
Yeah,
technology.
That's quite a dramatic and
Look it
catchy
up.
title, though. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it seems like questions may have kind of run their course for the moment, and we've shared your contact info in the chat. And I just want to thank you on behalf of Latitude and our regenerative real estate community so much for your time and expertise sharing that with us. Truly valuable and rare insights. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, we enjoyed it. Good to meet you all and stay in touch.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. All right,
Thank
bye
you.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Gonna save the chat before it goes, just in case there's something I missed.
So thanks again, David and
Yeah.
Neil.
Oh, yeah.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Dana.
Dana.
Let me know if there's any follow-up or you want to set up a call. I'd love to talk in more detail about any specific
I
topics.
think that would be good. Being a local, Dana, there are a couple
Yeah,
things that
yeah, we
came
should
up for me.
meet for
Yeah,
lunch.
hyper. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Cool. All right.
All right.
Take care.
All right.
Bye,
Yep.
guys.
Take care.
Thanks, Dana.